We have got a technical issue. I want to just draw your attention to the chat box, to all attendees. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. If you can use the chat box to introduce yourselves. So I've put up a range of questions in there. So your name, where you're located, who you work for, and the most important thing that you want to take away from this session. That'd be really helpful if you can use the chat box just to complete that. Now, I hope you're all safe and you're all well and you're somehow making the most of the situation. A lot of things have changed in the last few weeks, and I'm guessing that you're all pretty familiar with the way that online meetings work and Zoom works. So just a reminder, this is an interactive session, so I actually do invite you to unmute your microphones and you can turn on your cameras if you want. Can you all hear me okay? You may or may not be able to see me. I've actually switched off from the recording, which is now recording, I've switched off my cameras and any other items that might ghost over the screen. So you may not be able to see me, but anyway, many of you will know how to work this kind of software before. So it's just a reminder that the session is being recorded and it'll be shared with other people who've booked, but who unfortunately can't attend the live event. So just be mindful of that when you're sharing any information or you're asking a question. And I'm going to need to keep a tight rein on the timing. 30 minutes isn't very long and it'll go really quickly. So we're going to make sure that the recording of this session is available on our YouTube channel, and that'll be quite soon after we've finished, probably tomorrow, and you'll get a follow-up email with a link to the recording plus a copy of the slide deck. Okay, so we should be joined by Belinda Kiley. Now, I'm going to introduce the two of us. So to do that, I'll go to the next slide. This is very interesting because Belinda joined me earlier and unfortunately has not been able to connect on the internet. So at the moment, I think I'm going to have to freewheel on her behalf until she can re-establish an internet connection. But just to let you know who is intending to be your presenters, who are intending to be your presenters today. So I'm Colin Newbold. I head up the TLC online business, and Click 360 is our flagship brand of 360-degree feedback. Some of you will be very familiar with that. And Belinda Kiley is one of our most experienced lead facilitators and 360 feedback coaches. Now, I'm not going to embarrass her by asking how many 360s she's done, but you should also know that Belinda delivers our coach accreditation program, which I'll mention at the end. This is the 6th of 9 group mentoring sessions designed to share best practice when it comes to 360-degree feedback implementations. Some of you I know have attended previous ones, and welcome to this if it's your first one. If you haven't done so already, please just use the chat facility to introduce yourselves. I'm just going to go and check it out now. Let's just see what we've got in there. Okay, we've got Fabrizio, I think, from Italy. Venice, very nice too. And Fabrizio is a coach. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your first name wrong. Fabrizio, by all means, unmute yourself and join in. How should I pronounce your first name?
Fabrice, because I'm French.
Say again, Fabrizio. Fabrizio?
Fabrice.
Fabrice. Okay.
But you can say Fabrice. You can say Fabrice. It's okay for me.
Okay. Fabrice. Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining. So let me just explain how we're going to work with you. What we want to be doing is delivering short bursts of information accompanied by one or more slides. And then we're going to open up the floor to you guys for questions or comments or observations or suggestions, etc. So just let me position where this session fits into the overall scheme of things. Take a look at this busy flow chart and just for a few seconds, and I'll go through it. I'll explain each component. So once the reports have been generated, after the 360 has run, we invite participants to undertake their first virtual feedback coaching session. Now, we were already doing mainly virtual sessions way before coronavirus, and simply because they take less time, they offer better value, and because neither party's traveling anywhere, they're actually better for the planet as well. So that's what we're focusing on today. And I do believe we have got Belinda back with us. Belinda, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, yes. And hi
Fantastic.
to Fabrice.
Well done. Okay, well, I'd like to hand over to you now just to take up the story.
Okay.
I'm
You're
going
sharing...
to stop sharing and we'll bring your screen share in if you want to share your screen now with us.
I will just share that with you and
there we go.
Put it onto slideshow. So,
there, perfect.
So as Colin has said, this is a short session. It's intended really to spark discussion rather than being a formal sort of training of how to do something. If you're wanting something more in depth, do talk to us afterwards because we're very able to help you with that. So today it's about focusing in on three main questions. What is my role? How to prepare for the feedback session, and then how to facilitate the session itself. So in terms of thinking about that first question, what is my role? Fabrice, what do you see as being your role as a facilitator of a debrief?
To focus on this, I think it's important not to be too much involved and to stay more like a facilitator or coach than to believe sometimes that the company or the client is, or we are part of the client when it's not true.
Yeah,
it's a trap.
I mean, certainly from my experience, I'd very much agree with that. I think our role is a mixture of guiding, supporting and challenging. But as you rightly say, it is about helping facilitate understanding of what the report's saying, helping make connections, helping the participant develop a realistic view of themselves. Often I find people focusing maybe on their areas of development, forget their strengths. It's us helping them keep that balance and also helping them manage their reactions where it's appropriate. I think, Fabrice, are you an independent coach yourself, or do you work internally within an organization?
We are a company with 4 coaches.
Okay, so you are coaches. Okay, so I think if anybody's listening to the webinar afterwards, the one thing that I would flag here is that if you are an internal coach, or maybe you are part of the HR team, or maybe you're the line manager, it's just it's important to be really conscious about your role in this debrief, because you bring with you you have an existing relationship with the participant, and it is, as Fabrice said, quite important, I think, to keep a little bit of distance in being able to facilitate the debrief effectively. So it can be important to leave your other hats that you might wear in terms of relationships at the door and really focus in on this hat of being a facilitator. So moving on to sort of how we prepare, in terms of scheduling the feedback session, the things that we would say are important to take into account is the length, the setting, and thinking about the technology. As Colin said, a lot of the work that we do is virtual, but we do also do face-to-face, and we train people in how to do those face-to-face and virtual sessions. For us, and we tend to do virtual sessions within 75 minutes. I think anything beyond that becomes difficult to maintain level of concentration, and face-to-face can be up to 2 hours. How does that sit with what you do, Fabrice? Okay. We'll maybe come back to Fabrice a bit later. In terms of sending the report and considering timings of that, the timing, this is a question we're often asked, you know, when is the best time, the most appropriate time to send it? And I would say that it's about balance. You want to give the individual, the participant, enough time to become familiar enough with the report for your discussion, but you don't want to give them too much time to start analysing, to start reacting, if you like, to the feedback and the content. So from our experience, we usually find that 2 to 3 hours in advance is the absolute perfect timing. Because it gives enough time to become familiar with the report without getting too much into the detail of the content. In terms of preparing yourself, we would always recommend that you read the report in advance. And I would say it's about reading it through for no more than 20 minutes. I think if you try to focus in on it for longer than that, you're starting to make your own judgments. You're starting to reach your own conclusions of where you think the participant should be focusing. Whereas I think if it's under 20 minutes, it gives us enough time, one, to spot if there's anything in there that may potentially be a challenge to help the participant with, but also to start maybe making a few connections, picking up on a couple of themes. But really, that's as much as you would want to do. Then you're experiencing the report in the same way as your participant is. Any thoughts on that, Fabrice, if you're still with us?
I agree with this. It's at least about reading the report. It's true that we need to not to elaborate some opinions or convictions, thought. So it's better to stay colder than possible. Yeah.
Thank you. So in terms of thinking about how to facilitate, the 4 things we have up there, and we'll look at each of these in turn. Setting the scene, and I think it's the same as for any coaching or potentially interview situation. It's about choosing the right location. It's about setting the scene appropriately. I think particularly with 360, it's important to emphasize confidentiality, how the data and what data will be shared, and being clear and upfront about that. Clarifying the process, you know, what's going to be expected in terms of outcomes and who those outcomes are going to be shared with, and ultimately putting the individual at ease. Some people can be quite nervous, anxious about the feedback they're going to receive and the conversation they're going to have. So I think setting the scene appropriately and effectively is really key for then having a really good discussion. Then thinking about exploring the report together. What I'd like to do at this point is come out of this and to actually share and to share a report with you. So this is our sample report. Are you able to see that all right, Fabrice?
Yes.
It's on your screen. Yeah.
We're not seeing the report.
Yes.
And,
you're not seeing the report?
we're still seeing your slide.
No, not the report. No.
Okay.
You may have to go back to the
PowerPoint.
share screen and choose it from there.
Okay. Let's see what we can do. How about that?
That's it. You got
it. Great.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So what I would say is with the report, there are 2 different versions that are available. There's the PDF version, which is particularly useful if you want a hard copy and you want to share it with other people, which of course is the choice of the participant, or the digital version. Personally, I prefer working with the digital version because of the additional features that are in there, which I'll go through. But either way, I would say just make sure you're familiar with the format of the report. And if you are working with the digital report, just be mindful it does take probably up to 5 minutes to completely load. So it's something that you might want to encourage the participant to do at the early stages of your discussions. So in terms of the report, I'm not intending to go through the report in any great detail. We don't have time for that today. What I intend to do is to highlight some of the key features and maybe my approach to going through the report. So in terms of, and it's incredibly user-friendly, I have to say. So you don't need me actually to walk you through it. In terms of this, I'm going to stop at this point here where we talk about understanding the report. And as you can see through the report, the rater categories are color-coded, which makes it very easy to visually pick up themes between the groups and also to identify differences. You'll see at the bottom here, the numbers here. This indicates to you how many people have provided data within each of the categories. So obviously one manager, 2 direct reports here, 2 others,
yes,
and 2 peers. So I always point this out to participants so they're aware how many of their raters have actually completed. And then moving on to the content of the report, you've got the questionnaire there, so which questionnaire was used to complete. And then we start coming into the data. And this first part is the summary graph. And at this stage as well, it's about, I think this is part of almost setting the scene. It's about helping relax the participant into this. So I always try and ask and invite the participant to draw their own conclusions quite early on. So if we're looking at this page, we would look, and what this page is doing is it's showing the data per cluster. I would ask the individual what they are noticing, what they notice in all of this, what's the relationships, and leave them to start the discussion, and we start exploring from there. There's a few things to point out here. One, you'll see this red dotted line here and this green dotted line. And I think as a coach facilitator, debriefing of this is a very useful aspect to highlight. We would say that anything's at the green line or above is a very clear strength. It's something that you are demonstrating consistently. And usually, often organizations use that to define the standard that they're looking for, what they're aspiring everybody within this particular cohort to achieve. The red line marks the point a bit. If anything's below that red line, it really is a priority for development. And we would be encouraging participants to not ignore this, what's being told to them through this report. Anything that's in between is an opportunity to develop. It's likely to mean that in some instances, the individual has got strengths in these areas, but they're not doing it consistently and not in every situation. And that's where the development opportunity comes into play. Another feature, which is a very valuable feature, you'll see throughout the report, there are these boxes, how to interpret. I'm just going to click on that for a moment. And what it does is this opens up a workbook. And how I position this with participants is that this becomes your virtual coach. So when I'm not there to work with them, this is their reference point. It allows them to get greater explanation of what they're looking at. So in this case, we're looking at the summary graph. It explains that data. And it also poses some other questions for them and gives them an opportunity to make some notes. And you will see here that somebody has made some notes based on what they've seen. Their notes are automatically saved, so it means that they can come back to this at any stage. So it becomes useful as they do their own reflections, they can start adding their conclusions for themselves within the workbook. And the workbook is there at each key stage of the report. So just coming on then to where this again, same data, but presented slightly differently. So as we know, people have different preferences in terms of learning styles, how they take on information and how they process. And this can be helpful again as about making it clear. You know, we can see the variation there, can't we, in this particular one, but a lot of synergy and feedback in others. That can be useful things to highlight. And then this again, same information, but presented slightly differently. And you'll see in this that it's color coded. So anything on red is development priority. Anything in amber is a development opportunity, and anything in green is considered a strength and at the level that's required. So that's, I appreciate, I am going through this quite rapidly, Fabrice. And any questions as I go through?
No, everything is clear. It's okay. Thank you.
Good. So then we start looking at each cluster in turn. And within the clusters, we're able to open up the data and look at it according to each question statement that the individuals were asked to assess against. This is very much the scores on the doors, which is useful, and it allows us, to look at variations between raters. So in this case, even these variations are quite small, because we would consider a variation of 20% or more to be significant. Any variation beneath that, it is a difference, but it's not statistically significant. So we can see that these differences here, so one rater, one direct report gave this participant a rating just under 60, and another's given a rating probably early 70s there. So you can go through. Now on this particular cluster we're looking at, variations are not great, but if we go down to self-awareness, we automatically see the red there, but if we open those up, we can also see the variations in terms of how someone is being experienced by others. So those are the scores on the doors, but we also, importantly, and when participants start questioning and saying, well, I don't understand this, I don't understand how one person can experience me this way, or why my score is so low on that, particularly when I rate myself so highly, we would always say, right, okay, let's have a look at the comments. Let's have a look at the detail. And this often gives us clues as to why a particular rating level has been given. And that's the way that we would go through the report, and drawing then attention to a couple of other aspects of the report which are useful, particularly when you're trying to draw conclusions. What we want to achieve by the end of this meeting is we want them to be clear about a really strong strength, but also where their development priorities are. We've got all that data, but another good place where it can be summarized is here in terms of their highest and their lowest ratings, which also can be useful. And the other particular feature I think to highlight is the stop, start, continue. I think from working with participants, what often happens is that this page captures those things that maybe the raters haven't seen an opportunity to say before, or maybe they're the burning issues for them. So again, when we're looking at development opportunities and potentially looking at development plans longer term, this can be a particularly useful place to concentrate. So that really is a whistle-stop tour of the report. Any immediate questions for you, Fabrice?
No, because anyway, it's a tool we are using. So when I accept to participate to this webinar, I was more interested to learn something about the feedback and not about the tool 360.
Okay,
but
fine. Well,
I agree with everything. It's okay.
Okay. So in terms of looking at, going back to our slides, we've had a brief look at the report. And I would agree with you, the 360, it is a tool to enable a discussion. And I think what the report does is it does open up you to be able to have that very valuable discussion. And quite often what can come with that is the need to manage reactions and what's happening. Often I find we can get some resistance, or we get some maybe somebody goes quiet on you. And my advice would always be to voice what you observe. For you to be able to say, I notice that, or I get the feeling that, or I'm sensing that, in a way that's not judgmental, but it's just saying how you're experiencing the reactions of somebody, can open up the discussion. I think it's about positioning the feedback as a gift. As with any gift, we graciously accept it, but then we have the choice as to what we do with it. And I always remind participants that the feedback has been based on perceptions, and we can't argue whether that perception is right or wrong. That perception is real to the person who's given it. And therefore, for me, if there's no other question we consider, it's how are those perceptions helping or hindering you from achieving what you want? Because if it's stopping you achieve what you want, then it's probably something to focus on. If it isn't, then there may be other things in the report to focus in on. In terms of the way you handle feedback, Fabrice, does that resonate for you?
Yes, it's nothing strange for the moment.
Yeah. And that concept of feedback as a gift, is that one you use yourself?
Yes, usually we are using the feedback. Of course, we are doing trainings on feedback, and we are using also the candor from, what's the name of her? I don't remember. But the radical candor, that of course feedback is a possibility to help the people and to help them to grow up. So
absolutely.
For us, not giving a feedback is that you don't demonstrate any interest to the person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where there is, you can see the amount people have invested in giving the feedback actually by some of their observations, and the more comments that somebody gets, to me, is an indication of how important that particular area is to that rater. And I think when participants appreciate that as well, they really appreciate the value of the feedback that they're getting.
Yes, and we are also using the shadowing for. As I'm specialized in the sales, so I'm doing also shadowing. So I'm using the feedback very, very strongly.
Yes, yeah, I can appreciate. Interesting. So coming back to sort of how we facilitate that final point there in terms of next steps, reflection and checking out. We always encourage participants to take some time afterwards to really to come back, sit with the report for a couple of days and then go back to it and start looking at it, start drawing some conclusions. Encourage them to use the workbook, because that has such valuable information in it, and allows them to coach themselves actually in some ways. And then also to potentially do some checking out, which actually is the topic for the next webinar that we have scheduled, which is, I believe, next Tuesday. And in that, we'll talk about the process, about what you can do with the information in order to drill down further and to get maybe a more comprehensive sense of what it is that you could be doing, saying, acting differently to help address some of those perceptions.
Yeah.
That really brings us to the end of the brief session. Colin, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you, Belinda. Yeah, it's been really helpful. I'm just going to take the screen back for a second, because what I thought I could do is just quickly share the picture of where we are going next week. You've mentioned it already. Checking out your feedback is something that I know you leave towards the end of the feedback coaching session, the first feedback coaching session. You talk about how to do this, and you coach the participant to actually go out and have conversations. So as well as talking you through how it works in the physical world, I'll also introduce you to a feature of the digital report that allows for this step to be carried out electronically. So next week is all about checking out feedback. And then Belinda joins us again for the week after, which is the second feedback coaching session, which is as a result of the checking out process. And by now, the data that the participant has is richer and deeper and more clear. And therefore, it's a better time to start action planning. So that's the action planning session. We call it feedback coaching 2. And then the very last step in the process, which will be the week after that, will be the checking in process, which takes place several weeks, if not months, after the second feedback coaching session. So that just positions how those remaining sessions will take place. So thanks again to Belinda.
Thanks to
Belinda,
you.
thank you, Fabrice, for joining us. We will be sending out an email tomorrow which has a link to the recording of this, and also I'll
Okay, perfect.
include a copy of the
Thank you.
slides. I also want to just throw in the fact that Belinda is our facilitator on the accreditation program, and that's where she goes into much more depth about each of these sessions. So I'll include some information on that. Thanks to you both for your participation.
Thank you.
Please stay
Thanks,
safe, stay well. Bye for now.
Yes.
Bye, Colin. Bye, Fabrice.